My wife left me because our life was too boring. She wanted excitement, and apparently I couldn't deliver. But rejection has a funny way of sparking silent ambition. 3 years later, I'm running my own brand, and the woman who left me craving adventure? Well, let's just say things got interesting in ways she never imagined. Let me tell you everything. But before I dive in, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Your support helps this channel grow, allowing more men like us to find strength and resilience through stories like these. My name is Logan Davis. I'm 39 years old, and just a few years ago I was living a life I'd always considered stable. I worked as an IT manager at a software house in Dallas, paid the bills on time, and still found time to stubbornly try growing tomatoes in a cramped little garden in the backyard. It was in that uneventful routine that I built 12 years of marriage with Mia, and honestly, I was proud of it. The truth is, our dynamic worked like clockwork. I handled the stability, and she filled in the blanks with color. Mia worked part-time at an art gallery downtown, and would come home excitedly telling stories about quirky photographers and weird paintings I pretended to understand. On weekends, we split simple chores: grocery shopping on Saturday, a movie on the couch on Sunday. To me, that was comfort. To her, I started to suspect it was beginning to feel more like repetition. "Logan, have you ever thought about doing something just to feel your heart race a little?" she asked me once while stirring her coffee with brown sugar. It wasn't the first jab. She'd joked before that if she ever walked out the door, it would be because my wife left me for finding my life boring. At the time, I took it as a joke. But have you ever noticed how those kinds of jokes sometimes carry a sliver of truth? Her interests changed at the speed of a click. One day it was analog photography, then artisanal croissants. The next month, yoga classes with some guy named Zach Ortega. I paid for all the sign-ups thinking that being supportive was part of the marriage deal. But I started to notice something different in her eyes whenever I talked, with real pride, about a piece of clean code or how my tomato had finally turned red. It was like we were tuned into different stations on the same radio. Have you ever felt that heavy atmosphere you just can't explain? It had started to quietly settle over our home. Mia seemed more distracted, came home just a bit later from her plans, seemed less interested in my little daily wins. Nothing obvious, nothing I could point to as a real problem. Just this sense that something was shifting. Maybe it was just a phase. At least that's what I kept telling myself whenever I woke up in the middle of the night, wondering if I really knew the woman sleeping beside me. The first sign that something was seriously wrong came on a Tuesday in April, when I got an email from HR at 9:23 in the morning. "Budget cuts, restructuring. We appreciate your service." Words that danced across the screen like they were written in a foreign language. 12 years at the company, projects always delivered on time, not a single complaint on my record. None of that mattered. Within 15 minutes, I was packing up my Star Wars mug and walking toward the parking lot, unemployed for the first time since my early 20s. I came home hoping to find some comfort, maybe a few words of support, maybe even a hug, the kind that reminds you why you got married in the first place. Mia was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone while drinking a green smoothie I'd never seen before. "I lost my job," I announced, trying to sound more confident than I felt. She looked up for 2 seconds, muttered something like, "That sucks," and went back to her screen. No questions about our plans, no concern about bills. It was like I'd mentioned the weather. The following Thursday, while I was updating my resume in the guest room, I heard the front door slam. I came downstairs and found Mia holding 2 suitcases, the big ones she used for long trips. "I need to tell you something," she said, avoiding my eyes. "I'm moving to Miami with Zach." She paused, took a deep breath. We connected. The words came out rehearsed, like she'd practiced this conversation in the car on her way home. "Miami," was all I could manage to say. She nodded, finally looking at me. "Logan, you're a good man, but this has always just been this. I need something different." I tried to process it. My wife was leaving me for her yoga instructor and moving across the country. "And what exactly is different?" I asked. "I don't know for sure, but I know it's not this." She grabbed her keys from the table. "I'm sorry." And just like that, she left. My restart after a marital betrayal began at that exact moment. Even if I didn't realize it yet, I stood in that empty living room for hours. There was no fight, no attempt to understand each other, Not even a real conversation about the 12 years we were leaving behind. When I finally moved to check our bank accounts, I found out she'd transferred our joint savings into an unknown account. The betrayal was complete, emotional, physical, and financial. While I'd been worrying about the simple things in life, she'd been orchestrating her strategic exit. Now, sitting in that empty house, one question echoed in my head. What the hell was I going to do with the rest of my life? The first few days after Mia left were filled with silence and practical tasks. I didn't argue, didn't cry, didn't call friends for comfort. I just followed the script my instincts demanded: cancel contracts, separate belongings, and plan what would come next. Like every man rebuilding his life in silence after being left, I started doing exactly that. Quietly, without any outburst. Every decision was made with cold clarity, like I was running a software project. Only this time, the code was my own life. The strange thing was, for the first time in years, I felt in complete control of my choices. Around the second week, I called a real estate agent in Dallas and asked her to list our house in Richardson. I didn't go into details, just said I needed a quick sale for personal reasons. While she talked about timelines and market forecasts, I was already doing mental math on how much money I'd have to start over somewhere else. The house was worth enough to give me a few months of freedom, maybe even a year if I spent carefully. It was strange how a personal tragedy could turn into a financial opportunity when you actually sat down and crunched the numbers. About 3 weeks later, a buyer came along, a young couple with 2 small kids. Him excited about the garage, her in love with the big kitchen. We closed the deal on a Tuesday morning. I signed the papers without sentiment and got the check that same day. I paid off the last of our joint bills, packed the essentials into a few boxes, and let go of furniture that carried too many memories. It was freeing to realize how few things really mattered when you had to choose only what was essential. My post-breakup restart was taking shape in a surprisingly practical way. While going through an old drawer, I found a faded photo. Me at 15 next to my dad, both of us sweaty and smiling, holding a rustic table we'd just delivered in Austin. My dad was a carpenter with calloused hands and a quiet way of solving problems with wood and patience. "Logan, you've got a natural feel for this," he told me that day, watching how I handled the tools. Austin was just a few hours from Dallas, but it felt like a whole different world. A city of musicians, artists, people who valued handmade things in an age of mass production. Maybe it was time to reconnect with that skill I'd left behind for lines of code. I quickly looked into the handmade furniture market in Austin, commercial rent prices, and available workshop spaces. I found a listing for a converted trailer that served as both a living space and a workshop, perfect for someone who wanted to start small and grow organically. The price was within my budget, and the location, in East Austin, had the artsy vibe I was looking for. I called the same day, sealed the deal over the phone, and scheduled the move for the following week. For the first time since Mia left, I felt something close to excitement about the future. A feeling that I was building something new instead of just surviving the wreckage. I arrived in Austin on a rainy Thursday with my pickup loaded with basic tools, a few clothes, and the kind of determination that only comes when you've got nothing left to lose. The trailer was small, but functional, with enough space for a makeshift workbench and wood storage. I bought scraps of oak and pine from a local lumber yard, discarded materials from construction sites that were perfect for my first experiments. As I organized my tools and took in the familiar scent of fresh wood, I realized I was doing more than just changing cities. I was reconnecting with a version of myself I'd forgotten existed, someone who made real things with his own hands. The first few weeks in Austin were a slow but necessary rediscovery. I woke up without rush, drank black coffee from a metal mug, and spent hours just staring at the tools I'd bought secondhand. Some I recognized from afternoons with my dad. Others were completely new to me. There was no schedule, no one demanding productivity, just the luxury of trying and failing without corporate consequences. Strangely, the absence of external pressure made me more motivated, not less. My first attempt was a complete disaster. I tried building a simple bookshelf and ended up with warped boards, misaligned holes, and something that looked more like accidental modern art. I spent 2 full days trying to fix it before accepting that it was better to just start over. But instead of frustration, I felt a kind of relief. It felt good to have a problem I could solve physically, with my hands. without dealing with bureaucracy or office politics. Every mistake taught me something specific about wood, measurements, and patience. The first project that actually worked was a simple coffee table made from oak planks I'd found at a demolition site. Straight lines, basic finish, nothing fancy. But when I finished, I felt a different kind of pride than I'd ever felt for any code I'd written. It was physical, solid, something that took up real space in the world and that other people could touch. I placed the table in a corner of the trailer and found myself looking at it several times a day, like I needed to confirm I'd actually made it. Mia used to say I was boring for valuing simple things, but I was starting to realize there was a deep beauty in that simplicity. One Thursday afternoon, while sanding down a second table I was making just for fun, I got the idea to document the process. I grabbed my phone and snapped a photo of the messy workbench, sawdust everywhere, tools arranged my way. I wasn't aiming for art, just wanted to capture that moment of total focus. I posted it on Instagram with a caption that came naturally, "Learning that the best things are born slowly." It was more for myself than any audience. The first likes and comments caught me off guard. Strangers were leaving messages about how inspiring it was to see someone following their heart and creating with their own hands. I started posting more regularly, always simple photos of the process, raw wood, tools in motion, pieces taking shape. There was no growth strategy, just me documenting my learning journey. The betrayal and quiet healing were leading me into a space I never imagined exploring, and apparently it resonated with others who were also searching for something more real. The first request came in organically. A neighbor saw my table on Instagram and ordered a custom bookshelf for her books. A guy in a local band wanted a special rack for his vinyls. I only charged for the cost of materials plus a small symbolic fee for my time, because I still felt like a student. Every project was a new hands-on lesson. How to calculate exact measurements, choose the right type of wood for each use, apply varnish without leaving streaks or bubbles. It was fascinating to discover that each kind of wood had its own personality. What impressed me the most was how manual work affected my mind in unexpected ways. After years of dealing with abstract problems on a computer, there was something deeply satisfying about solving physical, tangible challenges. When a joint didn't fit perfectly, I could sand it down, adjust it, try again until it did. When the varnish looked uneven, I could scrape it off and apply another coat. It was a more direct and honest kind of problem solving than any software bug I'd faced in my previous career. Social media became my unofficial journal for this transformation process. I posted photos showing the progress of each piece, always with simple reflections about patience, starting over, and the difference between doing something out of obligation versus doing it by choice. I never directly mentioned the divorce or the reasons that had brought me there, just talked about necessary changes and figuring out who you are when no one's watching. People responded with their own stories of transition and change, creating a small virtual community of mutual support. 2 months after arriving in Austin, I had a routine that made sense for the first time in years. I woke up with the sun, drank coffee while watching the street outside, spent the mornings on ongoing projects, and the afternoons planning the next ones. I didn't make a lot of money, but enough to cover basic expenses, and more importantly, I felt like each day contributed to something bigger than just paying bills. It was like I was building a new version of myself, one piece at a time, with the same patience I applied to wood. My Instagram profile grew organically without any rush or forced strategies. People shared my posts, tagged friends who needed to see this, and commented on how comforting it was to follow someone creating beautiful things without hurry or commercial pressure. I replied to nearly every comment, always thanking them for their support and asking about their own creative projects. It was genuinely fascinating to discover how many people still held on to creative dreams they'd abandoned for adult responsibilities, a situation I knew all too well. The quality of my pieces was visibly improving with each project. The joints were more precise, the finishes smoother, the designs more balanced. I bought some better tools with the money from my first sales: a used electric planer, a sharper set of chisels, a more powerful drill. Every new tool expanded my possibilities and gave me more confidence to take on slightly more complex projects. It was a virtuous cycle of investment, learning, and growth that reminded me why I'd chosen tech in the first place. The most surprising part of this entire process was realizing how creative work influenced other areas of my life. I slept better, woke up more energized, and felt less anxious about the future. It wasn't just because I was doing something I enjoyed. It was because I finally had full control over the results of my effort. When I finished a piece, it was truly finished. No one was going to request last-minute changes. No boss was going to change the specs halfway through. There was a sense of completeness in the craft that made me realize how fragmented and unfulfilling corporate life had been, even in moments that seemed successful on the surface. The third month in Austin brought a subtle but significant change. For the first time since I arrived, I had more orders than I could handle on my own. It wasn't anything huge. A dining table here, a bookshelf there, a few custom benches, but it was enough to make me realize that this had stopped being just occupational therapy and had become a real business. I started organizing my time better, creating a simple waitlist and setting more realistic deadlines. It felt strange to once again experience the positive pressure of having responsibilities, but this time, by choice. My Instagram profile passed 1,000 followers without me even noticing, and private messages began to pile up. People from other cities wanted to order pieces. Photographers asked to use my space as a backdrop. Beginner woodworkers reached out for tips. I responded to everyone with the same patience I applied to my woodworking, always trying to help and share what I'd learned. I didn't see myself as an expert, just someone a few steps ahead on the same path. It was on a Friday afternoon that I got the message that would change everything. Hi Logan, I'm Julian Porter, an interior designer here in Austin. I've been following your work for a few weeks now and I'm really impressed by your progress. His profile showed sleek, polished projects, nearly 50,000 followers, and collaborations with design magazines. I'd love to talk to you about an opportunity. Would you be interested in participating in an independent design fair? I read the message 3 times before I believed it was real. We scheduled a coffee downtown for the following Monday. Julian was a man in his 40s, gray hair, casually dressed but clearly wearing expensive clothes. Your work has something I haven't seen in a long time, he said, stirring sugar into his espresso. Raw authenticity. People are tired of mass-produced furniture. They want pieces with a story. He explained that the fair gathered local artists in Eastside every month. It could be a great showcase for you to test deeper waters. The offer left me torn between excitement and imposter syndrome. Who was I to exhibit alongside established designers? But Julian insisted, you have a unique point of view. You're not trying to impress anyone. You're just doing honest work. He offered a small but well-located booth, no entry fee, just a percentage of sales. Think of it as an experiment. If it doesn't work out, at least you'll meet other artists in the area. I agreed, more out of curiosity than confidence. The 2 weeks of prep were intense in a way I hadn't felt in months. I selected 3 pieces that represented my style: a coffee table with preserved natural grain patterns, a reconfigurable modular bookshelf, and a long bench that had become my signature. Each piece got extra attention, multiple layers of varnish, hand-sanded details until they felt silky. It was perfectionism bordering on obsession, but it felt necessary to make myself feel worthy of the space. The fair took place on a sunny October Saturday, in a converted warehouse that oozed creativity. I arrived early to set up my small booth, more nervous than I'd been in months. The other exhibitors were an interesting mix: ceramicists, jewelers, graphic designers, fiber artists. They all seemed to know exactly what they were doing, while I felt like a well-meaning amateur. But when the first people stopped to admire my pieces, asking technical questions and complimenting the details, I started to realize maybe I did belong there. The day was a success beyond expectations. I sold the coffee table to a young couple furnishing their first apartment. The bookshelf went to a writer looking for something unique for his books. I got orders for 4 more projects similar to the bench. But more important than the sales were the connections. I exchanged contacts with other artisans, got invited to visit studios. It felt like I discovered a tribe I never knew existed. Late in the afternoon, a stylish woman in her 50s approached me. "Sorry for showing up so late, I'm Elena Rodriguez," she said, handing me a beautifully designed business card. "I work in small-scale investments for local artists, and I was really impressed by your work." She explained that she followed the handmade furniture scene in Austin and saw significant potential in what I was doing. "Have you ever thought about expanding?" Maybe a proper studio with capacity for bigger projects? The conversation ended with her asking me to think about next steps. The drive back was a mix of adrenaline and deep reflection. In 6 months, I'd gone from a failed marriage to discovering not just a passion, but a talent that people truly valued. I had Elena's card in my pocket, a full schedule for the coming weeks, and for the first time since Mia closed that door, a real sense that I'd built something solid, and mine. The abandoned husband had turned into a successful entrepreneur so gradually, I'd barely noticed the transformation. Driving through Austin's glowing streets, it was impossible to ignore just how much my life had changed. 2 weeks after the conversation with Elena, I called her and accepted the investment offer. With the money, I was able to rent a small but well-located warehouse in East Austin, on a cobblestone street that practically breathed creativity. I spent entire days painting walls, installing workbenches, and adjusting the lighting to highlight the wood. The space was simple but functional, exactly what I needed to grow without losing the handmade essence. When I finished setting it up, I felt like I finally had a real professional home. The first month in the workshop was a constant adjustment. I woke up earlier to organize the tools, met with clients to talk about their projects, and spent the afternoons fully immersed in the manual work. The routine was more intense than in the trailer, but infinitely more fulfilling. Every piece that left the shop carried not just my craftsmanship, but also the energy of that space I had built from scratch. It was like the environment amplified my creativity in ways I hadn't expected. Demand spiked quickly after Julian Porter posted photos of the workshop on his Instagram. Within days, I had enough orders to fill the next 3 months, which forced me to create a structured waitlist. I established a simple rule. Each client could order just one piece at a time, and the delivery time would always be realistic. I'd rather disappoint with the weight than with the quality. That was a lesson I'd learned in the tech world, and it applied perfectly to woodworking. It was right in the middle of this growth phase that Mia reappeared. One Thursday afternoon, while I was sanding a dining table, I got a message on Instagram. "Logan, can we meet? I need to talk about us." I read the message 3 times, felt my stomach turn, but didn't reply right away. Instead, I kept working and let that strange feeling fade on its own. I was no longer the man she had left behind in Dallas. I didn't need answers or late explanations. I ignored the first message, but they kept coming throughout the week. "I know you're doing well, I saw your photos. Zach and I broke up. I made a terrible mistake." Each new attempt irritated me more, not because of pain, but because of the entitlement. She seemed to think that all she had to do was show up regretful and I'd drop everything to hear her out. The regretful ex-wife, silent for years, didn't understand that I had moved on completely. Her persistence only confirmed that she still saw me as the same predictable Logan from before. The following Friday, she showed up in person at the workshop. I was just closing up when I saw her standing on the sidewalk, holding a small suitcase and wearing an expression that mixed hope and nervousness. "Hi, Logan," she said, like we were just running into each other casually. "I came to Austin to see you." I felt a mix of pity and discomfort. She seemed smaller, more fragile than I remembered. But I also realized I didn't feel anything beyond distant curiosity about what she might say. "Mia, what do you want?" I asked, not coldly, but without warmth either. She started talking about regret, about how Zach wasn't who she thought he was, about how our life in Dallas made more sense than she'd realized. I listened in silence, noticing how empty her words felt to me. It was like she was talking about people I had once known, but who no longer mattered in my current life. When she finished, I just shook my head. "Our time is over, Mia. There's no going back." She tried to argue, said we could start over, that she had matured and understood the value of what we had. But I had already closed that door inside myself months ago. "You taught me a valuable lesson," I said, locking the workshop. "You taught me that I needed to stop living to please others and start living for myself. Thank you for that." My tone wasn't cruel, just final. She could tell there was no room for negotiation, and she nodded, defeated. Before leaving, Mia glanced around the workshop through the window and said, "You really have changed, haven't you?" I smiled for the first time during the conversation. "Yes, I have, and you helped me change." She turned and walked toward the rental car, carrying the suitcase that probably held her dashed hopes. I watched until she disappeared around the corner, but I didn't feel sadness or relief, just the confirmation that I had chosen the right path. That night, sitting on the porch of the trailer, which I still used as my home even with the workshop, I reflected on how the encounter had been so different from what I had imagined years ago. There was no drama, no tears, just two people who had chosen different directions in life. I posted a photo of my tools neatly arranged on the bench with a simple caption, "Some chapters have to end, so new ones can begin." It was time to start thinking about the next step in my journey, something that went beyond just making furniture for those who could afford it. 6 months after that meeting with Mia, my life had settled into a balance I never thought possible. The workshop was running on a fully booked schedule. The waitlist stretched to 8 months, and I had hired 2 assistants to help with finishing the pieces. But what I was most proud of was the project I'd started on Wednesday afternoons. Free woodworking classes for kids from underprivileged families. Teaching those kids how to turn raw wood into something useful reminded me every day why I had chosen this path. The rejected man rebuilds his life in silence, and that's exactly what I did throughout this entire journey. I never sought revenge, never publicly shared what Mia had done, never used my story as a marketing hook. I simply worked, grew, and became the version of myself I was always meant to be. Every piece that left the workshop carried a part of that quiet rebuilding process. And when I saw a client smile or a teenager finish their first bench, I knew I had found my place in the world. Sometimes on Austin's quiet nights, I'd think back to how it all started, with a simple line from Mia, that our life was boring. She was right in a way, but not for the reason she thought. Our life was boring because I had stopped dreaming, stopped creating, stopped chasing something that truly fulfilled me. The betrayal was painful, but it was also the push I needed to rediscover who I really was beneath all those layers of complacency. If someone asked me today what the greatest gift I ever received was, I'd answer without hesitation, the day Mia walked out the door with her suitcase. Not because I didn't love her, but because that moment forced me to find a much deeper kind of love, the self-love that comes from building something with your own hands. Today, when I lock up the workshop at the end of the day and watch the lights of Austin flicker on, I feel a genuine gratitude for every scar that brought me here, because sometimes you have to be abandoned by someone else to finally find yourself. And now I'm speaking directly to you, someone who stayed with me through this journey of how a rejected man quietly rebuilt his life, turning abandonment into purpose. Have you been through something similar? Maybe your wife left because she thought your life was boring. Maybe you had to start over after infidelity. Or maybe you discovered that the end of a relationship can be the beginning of something better. Tell me in the comments how you faced that situation, and whether you were able to turn the pain of rejection into fuel for discovering who you truly are. If this real story of silent resilience resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new content. Every day I share stories about men who faced infidelity, emotional abandonment, and managed to bounce back through hard work and the courage to rebuild from scratch. Just like I turned the worst moment of my life into a purpose to teach and create, you can also discover that your greatest strength lies in using difficult experiences to build a better version of yourself.